All right, we're back. We were just working on a two-column layout, and one thing that I wanted to change really quickly for you guys was a couple of things. I made some couple of changes, so let me update GitHub with these changes. I'll say updated, sorry, updated. Let's see, add these changes in there. Update layout a little bit. So you were too fast. There we go. Okay, so I've changed it to my content from my main is going to have 6 columns now, and my content from my aside is going to have 4 columns, right? With a push of 1, which I'm pushing over 1. And the reason why my push wasn't working was because, silly enough, I put margin instead of margin left, right? Margin means margin all around. That's why I was pushing it down too. So I wasn't just pushing it to the left. So I've got a push 1 on this side, which is the margin left, and that's what I'm doing with this one. And I've expanded it. The other thing I've done is my left, I used to have it as float. I'm going to change this, instead of saying left, it's going to say, something like inline block, inline. So I know what it means. Inline block. So that's what I have here. Instead of my left, as an example, I'm going to have both these items as inline block, but I want to apply both these things, so I can say something like this. I can say inline block. Notice how they're very similar instead of saying left. And if I was to do that and inline block and refresh, let's go back for a second, sorry. Make sure I save everything. And if I refresh my screen, which is this one, then I get this kind of stuff. So 2 columns. I've got a bit of a space there, right? So, I've got some more room for an extra column. If I add more here, I think my side is the right size. If I add more columns, I got 6 and 4, plus another one is, so 10, plus 1 is 11, plus about 1 on the sides for my 12 column grid, right? Equivalent that I'm making. I've got this one big piece here, right? So sometimes I only want half a column or whatever of space or a margin, right? I could do that too. I could specify only half a column, right? So let's do that. Let's go back. Be careful. You don't want to go too crazy. And some of the more advanced layouts have other ways of doing it. So instead of push, half a column, right? And I'll say margin dash left is something like 4.1516, something like that, 4.16%. And that's what I want to do here. I want to push half a column to the right. And it's approximate. Again, it's not a perfect layout. That's a little bit better. I've got a bit of float issues around here, right? So, again, I can also push this layout here. So notice how I've got half a column here, and I want to put half a column on this side. I could push half on the left as well to kind of solidify my layout. So let's go back. So I could push half a column on the left as well. Let's push half. There's a lot of stuff that I'm putting here in line, right, for my classes. There's quite a bit here. The difference is this is 6 columns and this is 4 columns. 6 and 4 column layout, right? And that's what it looks like now. Even push half is pretty big, right? And the reason why it looks more on this side than it does on this side is because I've got my padding on this side and my padding on this side is not quite aligned. This is 6 columns, this is 4 columns. So again, there's different ways I can do that for my 2 column layout. Questions around 2 column layout, right? So I've kind of done it in a couple ways. What if I want both these 2 things to be centered, right? So, again, I have 6 and 4 and I want them both to be kind of centered. How could I do that? Is there another way that you can think about centering them? And the answer is I'd have probably another wrapper around them, right? So let's contain a wrapper. I'm going to call this, let's say a div tag as an example with a class of wrapper. And I want to put my wrapper, around both of these two items. So div. And now what I want to do is take this div tag. Let me just format the code here. I want to take this div tag, this whole thing, and float it in the middle, right? Float this whole thing in the middle of my container. Let's put a container class, a test border class around this thing, really quickly. That's my test border class. And if I go back and I refresh, I can see that now there's a test border class around this whole thing, right? Now, what if I specify, knowing that there's, I have 6 columns here and 4 columns there, plus there's another column in place in the middle, kind of a space. I specify in here that I have a certain column width. The whole column width is going to be I can adjust my column width. For example, I only want it to be 10 columns on the outside. Can I do that? So I'm specifying a width and then a width again, percent, right? What is the percent taking? Is it the absolute percent of my whole screen, or is it the outside container? That's the question, right? So if I go back to this, and again, and I specify my whole wrapper has 10 columns. That's all it is. My whole wrapper that wraps around my main and my aside, right? But my main and aside have 4 columns plus an extra half column in the middle, plus border and padding and everything else to kind of separate these two things, right? So how would that work? If I refresh, it looks like this. It actually drops the amount that's in here to 10 columns, and then these two they inherit that much width to use their percentages. So if I say this one has 10 columns, the outside border, which is my wrapper, these ones only have that much percent left to play with. So out of 100% now, I've dropped it to 10 out of 12 columns, as an example, whatever that is. So it's I've dropped it by 16%, or something like that, right? So I have 85% that I'm using. This space is 85% of my width. That means I have 15% of my width left to play with, right? So this looks a lot tighter, right? Still not quite centered, but it's a lot tighter than what it was, right? And if I think that 10 is too much, like it's too much space on the side, because I want this centered, I could make it 11. So I'm going to go to 11 columns on the outside. Remember, there's grids within grids is what I'm really trying to do, right? That's a little better, that's a little looser. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that my column, my outside border here, right, has a margin of auto, right, to center it. Let's see if that works. So if I go back to here, and I'm saying my wrapper has a margin of auto. My wrapper is outside of my, inside my container, but outside of my main and my aside, and that's what it's wrapping. So it's going to be somewhere down here. So I'm going to call it wrapper. It's really my content wrapper, that's what it is, so wrapper. And it's going to have a margin of 0 for the top and bottom, and auto for the right and left. Right? Auto means it's going to take whatever remaining space there is from the right and to the left, and equally distribute it on both sides to create a centered layout. Right? So save it. Go back here and refresh. Now you can see that it's more in the center. A little bit of space here because of the way I've laid out the inner columns, but now I've got some pretty good centering for my 2-column layout. Right? Questions? So I've kind of created this 2-column layout instead of floating, I'm using inline block. And if I change the size of my screen now, as I kind of putter down into this, notice how it retains the centering and the total area, right, as I move from regular to small, right? My side still stays there regardless of how much I've got in there, right? Let's see what happens with the text though. See, the text is it pushes down, right, to here. This has less space, so it forces its way down into there, right? And I don't have any styling for my H1 tags, right? And I know that one thing is that they all should be the same in terms of, because they're H1 tags, they're way up here, right? They're kind of main elements. So I'm going to say H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. All of my tags have a font weight of bold, right? Which makes sense. All of them should be bolded. And you know what? I also want them to be at least a little bit larger as they go. So for example, we can do this too. We can say my H1 tag is going to be something like, let's call it 3M. So font size 3M, make it really large. So H2 tags are going to be slightly smaller, so font size is still big, 2.5M, right? We're going to adjust the line height in a second. H3 tag is going to be, my font size is 2M, still big. And my H4 tag, as we swim down here, font size is back down to 1.5M. For my H4 tag, H5 I mean, H5 tag is going to be finally equal to the regular size. Font size is equal to 1M. And my H6 tag is going to be slightly smaller. So it's going to be font size is equal to 0.8M. Right, so my line height, my font size is this, but my line height is going to be even bigger. So it's going to be like 3.5 M's. So let's say we'll make it a little bit larger. This will be line height. This is like how much spacing there is for each of the lines, right? 3 M's. Make it half an M higher. Line height here is going to be 2.5 M's. Line height is equal to 2 M's, as you can see the pattern. And line height is equal to 1.5 M's for a more dramatic effect. And this one will make it 1 M. Line height is equal to 1 M. Okay, so what does that do with these little changes that I've got? If I go back and if I refresh, I get this. Massive, right? Hello world. I got a big aside, right? Here's my aside. It's pretty big. So this is the line height. It's showing you the line height. It gives me 3 M's worth of, or 3.5 M's worth of line height. It's pretty big. Sometimes people do that with their H1 tag. They kind of add that in, right? So make it really, really big. How does this look in my layout? Well, it does this. So you see how my layout scrunches it up when I go into the small layout. I stack again, right? Because I don't have enough space for my H1 and my H2 tags anymore. They're too big, right? So I can fix that. My copyrights is looking pretty big too. Everything is looking really, really big. Right? So I know that that's the wrong size. So it's probably going to be something like, let's take a half M off everything, right? So 2.5, we'll make this 3. Even 3 is too much. You know, kind of thing. We'll do some refinements. 1.5, and we'll make this 2. And this is, sorry, or is that 2? 2 and 2.5. Let's go 2, 2M and 2.5, sorry. And we'll say this is 1.5 and 2 as we drop it. And this will be 1 and 1.5. And then my H5 tag will be, 0.8 8, let's say, and like I said before, about 1 empty space. And then this one will drop even more to like 0.6 and 0.8. Okay, cool. Let's see the effect of that one with my H1 elements as I scrunch in a little bit. That's a little bit more palatable. This one for sure it works well for me. Here's my aside. This one, not so sure. I think even my H1 tag is still a little bit too big. It's still a hero size, right? So if I go back to here, this one works okay. This one's okay, but it's scrunched in from my H1 tag, right? And we can reduce that a little bit. So instead of 2.5, we can make it 2.2. And again, this is some refinement we're putting in. And we'll make this like 2.7 for our line height. And we have a big line height, like half an M is pretty big as a space, right? It's a little better. Okay. So hello world, and then here's my aside for my secondary thing. That's pretty good spacing. But still, I have a problem when I come to here because I don't have the space in a smartphone design. This would be equivalent of a smartphone layout, right? I got a problem with that. So we've covered the box model over like the last 3 weeks, right? Kind of stuff. And so please expect that the box model on next week's quiz will be there. I'll be talking about content, padding, border, and margin, and some shortcuts. How do I put if I want to say, padding top, border top, margin top, I can do it that way. Or there's some shortcuts that I can use to do it the other way, right? We also talked about different ways of displaying today. Block, inline, and inline block, and none, right? Doesn't display at all. And also flow, right? So when we talk about things like laying things out with the difference between block versus inline block, we showed that a little bit. I'll go down to what I was talking about with margins. If I use margin auto, right, what it does is it takes, again, the remaining white space from both sides of my container and equally distributes them so I can center my layout. And the way to do that, to center any item, is to put 0 auto as margin within the container that it's being centered inside. Right? So 0 auto. 0 for top and bottom, auto for left and right. That's what margin does for when we put auto. All right? Again, I can have different paragraph tops and bottoms. They're talking about the default paragraph top and bottom. I haven't specified a default. Sometimes I use min height as a minimum height, like I said, instead of a height, because a height specifies the height. It's a fixed height, as opposed to a minimum height, which is what I did here with my my content layout, right? So I specified a minimum height. So for my this wrapper right here, this outer wrapper, my minimum height is 80 VH or 60 VH, but it still will push things down if I need to, and I can scroll to see the bottom of my page in a different layout. Okay, so we did that. We put padding around elements. We've talked about different notations. Again, this is the one notation, which is one value, all sides, right? 2 notations. We talked about this. So top, bottom, left, and right. This is something that's funny when you have 3 values. The first applies to the top. The second applies to the right and left. And the third applies to the bottom, where you split the top and the bottom and the right and left are together. I don't commonly use this too often, but it would have worked in our layout, right? If I had specified a top and bottom that were different. An example of that would be if I go to my nav layout, that would have been a great example of how to use that, right? Where my top and my bottom are different, but my left and right are the same. So I could have used this notation because it's exactly the same. So top, bottom, right, and left. That's very common.
How does it know?
It's got an overloaded constructor, right? So think about a CSS declaration as anything to the right of the colon is the parameters that are going inside the constructor of the method. The method itself, this parameter, a property, instead of calling it a property like display, think about it as a method, my display method. And I'm sending in parameters, right? The display method has an overloaded signature, which means it can take different parameters. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3.
But, okay, so if I want the top to be 15 pixels, bottom to be 10 pixels, but I want the left to be 5 pixels, I would list it as 15, 10, whatever.
It's going to be in order. So you start at the top, and you go top, right, bottom, left. That's with those the four numbers, four digits.
Using 3 though.
If using 3, the first number is the top, the second number is the right and the left, and the third number is the bottom. Okay, that's that shorthand. And then for this one is top, right, bottom, left in a clockwise order, like it says. And you can mix the units. You don't have to use pixels like I showed you or percentages. You can use pixels, ems, and percentages. Each one can be different depending on your layout. All right. So we talked about that. Borders, border styles. I talked about borders being the way we do them is I use them for troubleshooting a lot of times for borders, right? And they just give examples of different kinds of borders, dotted. There's different kinds of borders in terms of a ridge, and sometimes these ones that look three-dimensional, kind of old school. Like when you look at them, you're like, I remember layouts like this from the 90s, late 90s. So please try and keep it simple when it comes to borders. Right now we're into flat design, right? We're not into like borders with a lot of other kind of special effects, right? We talked about space between heading and image. How do we do that? Because that's just the spaces we put in. Float properties are things that confuse people. So again, it makes elements float, right, in a sea of text, or it can wrap stuff. So if I have text and I want to wrap stuff around it, I can use my float. That's a good use of float. What I was doing before when I was floating stuff to the left doesn't work great for responsive layouts, especially for layouts that are for devices. It's better to use inline block if you can, like I was talking about, right? So we've kind of covered that. Again, when you say float left, if you want the element on the left and the rest of the content to float to its right, right? If you go right, if you want the element on the right to position to the top right corner and the rest of the content to float to its left, to wrap around its left. And you can specify none to kill the float. Sometimes we need to specify none to clear the float because it kind of keeps going. An example of that would be this. Okay. And I want to use the Clearfix. Clearfix is a method that they kind of made it so it clears the float from both the parent and the child. And you can do that if you have multiple elements in kind of in a line. You create a Clearfix class where you basically clear the float of left and right. Right. So if I say clear, and if I say both, I can clear both the right and left floats, right? It's actually called the clear element. And you can assign that to something of a class called Clearfix, which is a very common way of doing it. We use overflow when what happens is also overflow. Remember how I showed you the container? A container will shrink wrap its contents, right? But sometimes the contents can poke through because the contents are bigger than the container, right? So we use overflow to shrink wrap the container so it'll expand. A container will expand with its contents as opposed to cut off, right? So there's different kinds of overflow. Overflow hidden will cut off, will truncate all the content. So if anything's inside of there, if it's too much content for the container size, it won't expand the container, it'll just cut off, right? There's also scroll and auto. And auto, it really works well if you want to expand your containers like I do in a fluid layout. I really haven't talked about relative positioning yet or absolute positioning. I'm going to get to that the next conversation we have. And I'm taking this really slow, guys, because this is some of the most misunderstood pieces of your CSS. Okay? One thing to note, I want to load in, before we guys go, I want to give you one little tidbit of some cool stuff we can add in, right? Right at the end of our little presentation today. I want to go to Font Awesome, and we kind of did this before, but I'll show you. I want to go to Font Awesome for a second, which is it's a CSS toolkit for icon fonts, right? I want to use icon fonts in my layout because that's kind of the more modern way of doing things with our layouts. We don't just put words anymore. We put icon fonts or just icon fonts and no words, right? And I can get them from this place here, Font Awesome. I can download this stuff, right? And what it does is if I go to download, right, I get this Font Awesome package. So let's do this together. So I'm going to download my Font Awesome package. I'm going to put it in my downloads folder, right? So save. And if I expand it, as an example, and I go into it, so here's my Font Awesome layout. I can see that I have CSS, I have some fonts in here, a bunch of fonts, and some other stuff. All I need is these two things, my CSS and my fonts, to make it all work, right? So how do I do that? How do I include that in this thing right here? Well, the great thing is with my layout, I'll go into my files here, and I want to add my Font Awesome into my layout. I'm going to add it in my content. So I'm going to take my CSS for my my two CSS pieces here and drag them into my content, right? So right in here. There's my Font Awesome. And I'm going to do the same thing with fonts. Fonts I'm going to put in, if you notice, fonts and CSS are kind of in the same level. So I'm going to put them inside the same level for myself as well, which means it's going to have its own directory on the root for fonts. So I'll take my fonts folder and I'll kind of pull this into the root. Of course, it won't allow me to do it. I'll just create a folder called fonts. What I meant to do for this for this next trick is drag the fonts into my fonts folder. Right? There we go. Here's my fonts. Okay, so now I need to use my class. How do I use this new stuff I downloaded from Font Awesome, right? I want to be able to include it as another style sheet, and I should probably include it before my main and after my reset. So I'm going to kind of do that. I'm going to say link, and my style is content, and then font dash awesome, if I'm not wrong, .min.css, right? Font awesome.min.css, and I've added it in. Well, what Font Awesome does, it gives me the ability to put in some additional tags in my lists. So example would be, I can have an I tag, right? And let me just separate it off like this so you can see it. I can have an I tag inside my list with a class of Font Awesome with a home icon, okay? So let me just show you what that looks like in one line. There's my class, and here's my products. And I'm going to put a little space between that and my products. And if I've installed everything correctly, and when I go back to my my layout and I press refresh, then I have a little home. Right?
This CSS is allowed on our main project.
Yes. That's why I'm giving it to you.
Making sure.
If I give it to you, you're allowed to use it. Right? Almost done. Almost done. Still going. I need another minute or so. Thanks. So if I go to this now, font home is really not where it should be. It shouldn't be under products. It should be under home. So I'll take this I tag, which is what it is, like almost like the one we use for italics. I'll take it and I'll put it before my home tag, like this, right? So that way we can have a little home next to my elements. And if I go back and if I refresh, I have a home, a little icon next to my home. Okay? So Font Awesome, and we can include an external CSS style. I will allow Font Awesome in your projects because it gives you that little. If you actually look at it, there's a bunch of icons to go through there and to look. So if I want to find an icon that I want to have, so I can search through for different kinds of icons that they have. Here's the icons. And if I want to search through something like a contact page, like a contact icon, or some kind of phone, because I want a phone icon, right?
You're subscribe.
And I want a phone icon, like I said, right? So I can go through phone, and there's some examples of some phone, right? So here's my phone. And it also give you the code to put in, which is FA phone for the style, right? So nice and easy. So there's nothing to do as long as you install Font Awesome in your inside your layout. Okay, that's it for me this week, guys. Next week, remember, first thing we do, I'm going to test you on the box model as a quiz. First thing. Thanks a lot.